that said, I won't take too much time. What I've posted a bunch of stuff already, and I'm not going to go through my whole sort of. I have a lot of stories, as I know you know. A lot of you do too. I have a lot of stories. But the story about how we ended up in those fancy robes in that hotel bed. So I wrote it down to keep it as succinct as I could, which is not very succinct. It's hard to know where to begin with something like this. I started writing it several times, mostly because I don't want to focus on my friendship with Jim too much. I wanted to talk about what he meant to me and to you. If you're here, then you know he was worthy of your love, and that is a great beginning. The older we all get, the more we realize how bittersweet life truly is. With life, you get death. That's inescapable. And with love, eventually, every time you get grief. It's the price we pay. But damn, it's worth it. And the harder you love, the harder you'll grieve one day. It's a choice to love, to be kind, to put yourself out there, to give of yourself, to be a person who is of service to others, a person with empathy. Jim Moore made that choice every day. That's remarkable in anyone, even courageous. When you grew up the way Jim did, it's even more remarkable. Some of you know this, but Jim attended more schools than he had years of schooling. His family moved often in pursuit of work for his mother, so Jim was a perpetual new kid, a target for every bully. At least he was until that one year he had delayed but much appreciated growth spurt that made the bullies reluctant to go after him. He learned martial arts and clad himself in emotional armor. I think of the famous shots of him with his hair down to his ass, big bastard in sunglasses sitting astride a massive Harley. You'll see that in a minute. Looking every inch a member of Sons of Anarchy. But not only was that motorcycle not Jim's, he didn't even know how to ride. That's the perfect image of Jim in those days. He could have dismantled you, but honestly, he didn't have the heart for it. He grew up feeling alienated nearly all the time, feeling like the outsider, because he was. He was left out. When he started to make friends, they would move again. He would be bullied again. Like so many of us, he escaped into books and comics and movies. Kids who grow up this way often turn into angry, sullen, violent adults. The truth is, though most people never really saw it, Jim did have a temper. But with that, as with so many other difficult elements of his youth, he had a solution. He told stories. That was all he ever wanted to do or be, a storyteller, a writer. I believe that part of his desire to write came from the need to escape. But it was more than that. Some of us are cursed, or blessed if you prefer, with an imagination that can't be turned off. Jim had that curse and that gift. Brainstorming stories, writing, getting paid for doing that was all he wanted. From the extraordinary volume of world building he did at White Wolf, to his first comic sale to Marcus McLaurin at Marvel, to his first original horror novel, he got his dream. I won't go through his bibliography. You can find all kinds of things online. All I will say is that he had a gleefully twisted mind, that he never said no to a paying gig, including Dr. Doom vs. Bracken, and that he loved to murder in print the people who irritated him in real life. Honestly, he relished it a bit too much, but if that kept him from calling me to ask him to help bury a body, it was fine. Those of you who know me know I can be a bit dad-like at times. I'm a control freak, kind of bossy. But if that's the case, Jim was everybody's favorite uncle. The only time he judged you was if you weren't working on your passion. If you were a writer or wanted to be a writer and you were currently working on a story or a novel manuscript, or you weren't, sorry, well, woe unto you, my friends. I must have heard him threaten bodily harm and worse more than 100 times. He would interrogate writers as to their current output and then give them assignments like he was Mr. Miyagi ordering them to wax on, wax off. By the time you see me next, you're going to have finished that novel, he'd say, or you'll have finished and submitted 3 short stories. It's astonishing how often that worked. How many people went home energized or terrified into fulfilling those tasks? They put aside self-doubt or the doubts others had about them. They carved time out of their busy schedules in the morning or after work, and sometimes at work. They did this because Jim demanded it, though really they knew what had happened was that, often without using the words, Jim had told them that he believed him. That's the key. This guy who had been constantly bullied, who had been beaten up, who had been looked down on, he didn't ever want to make anybody feel the way he'd been made to feel. Instead, he became everybody's cheerleader, everybody's coach, and not just for writers. If you worked with Jim at one of the retail jobs he had over the decades to supplement his writing income and to make sure he had health insurance, then he was your fun uncle too. Not everyone loved him at these jobs. Not everyone liked him. He knew that, and it didn't trouble him one bit. But if you were a kid who needed a mentor, or needed someone to stand up for you, or just someone to talk about movies with, Jim was your guy. Sometimes the manners his mother and a mostly Southern upbringing instilled in him could rub people the wrong way. How many times can you suggest to a grown man that he stop calling 21st century women dear lady before you just surrender to his program? My mother raised me with manners, good sir, he said. He was stubborn as hell. Sure, he'd smile and nod and agree with you, but none of that guaranteed that he actually agreed with you. Stubborn. I wrote about this shortly after he left us, so many of you know this part of the story. But Jim was a caretaker, a caregiver. He took care of his mother when she could no longer care for herself until she died. Later, he took care of his first wife, Bonnie, until she passed. I remember exactly where I was driving in my car the December morning when Jim called to tell me that Bonnie had died. But you know what he did first? He calmly asked me where I was, and then made me pull over and put the car in park. He had come home and found her in their bedroom. I think she might have been wrapping Christmas gifts. He sat down and called me, and even in those first few shattering minutes, he made sure I would be safe before he told me. There's more, so much more. My white-knuckled terror in the passenger seat while he drove a U-Haul towing his car 1,400 miles when we moved home to Massachusetts. He also smashed the side of the U-Haul truck, pulling out of the gas station. So, John, you should have asked me before going. The stories we wrote together, adventures and sorrow, but I really am trying to keep us focused. In his prime, Jim wrote more and faster than almost anyone I could think of. He was versatile, crossing genres and mediums. His early novels revealed so much of who he was and the life he led. So if you haven't read those and want to know Jim better, you definitely should. That's the thing with writers, isn't it? They leave their stories behind, and as long as we can read them, they're always with us. I know a lot of the stories about Jim's childhood and youth, but the person who could see the dichotomy of Jim more better than anyone is Tessa. She knew the kid who had been through some shit, who had built himself a hard outer shell. I'm sure he had a massive chip on his shoulder in those days, but they became close friends. He would say she'd been his best friend, but there was more to it than that. Whether she knew it back in those days or not, Tessa had been his first love. Decades later, a widower living in Haverhill, writing fantasy novels and horror stories, Jim found her on Facebook and was shocked to find Tessa living in Western Massachusetts. It seemed like serendipity, fate. Soon they were dating. I honestly think Jim was in shock, but a very happy shock. His first love, with whom he'd never been more than friends, had come back into his life. Tessa found a very different man than the boy she'd known, but still with the same core of decency and strength. They dated, and in time they were married. Jim could never have seen it coming, doing what he loved, married to the woman he loved. Life had a lot of difficulty ahead for him, but for a while he got to live fairy tale happy. Skipping this next bit, because I don't think either one of us will get through it. And he loved the rest of us too. He had a big heart, and he used it all every day. He believed in justice and equality and kindness. I'm so grateful to have called him my friend. He made me better, just as he did for so many of you. Jim will be sorely missed, but I know with certainty that we have been influenced by his kindness and empathy and enthusiasm, and every time we show those traits in ourselves, Jim is still lifting up those who need lifting, comforting those who need comfort, encouraging those who need encouragement. We'll let people know we have faith in them, partly because Jim always reminded us through his example how powerful a little faith can be. Those of you who are writers, I have faith in you. Write your damn book, my friends. Everybody will turn their attention to the video screen. Jason has it.